2, 1, 100 free episodes. And welcome to the 103rd episode of Thursdays with Moire. 100 years of Morbin or vampires suck. We are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Nosferatu by exploring three very different, well, two fairly similar vampire movies. One very different from the rest and considerably worse, but we'll get into that in a second. Not to bury the lead, but I'm going to do it anyways because the movie already did that. Anyways, how are you guys doing? It's Thursday night. I'm your host, Ian Taylor. Joining me tonight, as always, is my wonderful co-host, musician, guest artist. Not a guest, but he's a co-host on the channel, Devin Kane. And of course, our famous friend from Filthy Capitalist America, filmmaker Stephen Beason. How are you guys doing tonight?
Hey, I'm doing well. I was doing really well before I had to watch Morbius again.
Again?
But but it's wow, happy to be back.
Glad to have you.
Good to have you.
How are you doing, Devin?
Oh, I'm doing just fine.
Nice.
I got bit by something when I was asleep though, so hopefully that doesn't mutate into anything.
Well, did it happen to be two bites right next to each other?
More or less.
2 bite marks. So did the doctor conveniently not notice it after doing a thorough checkup?
What doctor?
Oh, there you go. You should probably get that checked.
Wait a minute, which doctor?
No, I just put some anti-venom on it. Hopefully Sony, doesn't interfere with that.
Oh.
Just call me Venom.
Yeah, well, hey, that's what Morbius was missing right there. Maybe Michael Keaton will show up and ask you to join a villain group out of nowhere for a character you never met. Spoilers!
No, can you imagine the rhymes that Eminem could have gotten out of Morbius?
What rhymes?
We were robbed. We were robbed.
Morbius, Morbius, Dorbius, Corbius, Morbius, Forbius.
Well, where Eminem failed, Hannibal Buress succeeded.
Oh. Well, let's talk about vampire cinema and kind of how we got introduced to vampire movies. And I kind of like to open up by saying I am a huge fan of vampiric cinema. Regretfully, I have not read the book of Dracula. I have not seen the original 30s movie of Dracula, but I've seen just about every other version. Unfortunately, that includes the Eddie Murphy version, directed by Mel Brooks.
Vampire in Brooklyn?
Yeah, that is...
one of the stunt people died on the set of that movie?
That's Vampire in Brooklyn. For that movie, that is unfortunate. That's really unfortunate. But, I'm a huge fan of vampires. Vampires have fascinated me for quite some time. Like the more generic, cheesy, monstrous vampires to the more fleshed out vampires that more so deal with their vampirism as a sickness instead of something that defines them as an evil character. And in fact, I'm gonna be a shill here and say this Sunday is gonna be the first episode of my vampire series. It's based around Vampire the Masquerade. It's a live play series. And I set it in the 90s in kind of a fictional town called Small Springs. So I have such a love and passion for the vampire genre, trash and all.
Getting Twin Peaks vibes there almost.
Yeah, Twin Peaks, a little bit of Let the Right One In, a little bit of a whole bunch of different movies and TV shows.
Well, no, I mean, just kind of jumping in here, I too have always been fascinated by the whole, vampire mythos. I think there's something that's the sort of morbid curiosity, no pun intended, that we have with that kind of, world, that sort of idea of, people who have to feed on blood to stay alive. And no, I mean, I I've always found it fascinating. And one thing about, vampire cinemas or films of the vampiric genre that I think is so interesting is that even though it's the core concept is sort of the same, throughout all of the movies, there's always new directions and new things that each film does with it.
Mm-hmm.
You think about something like Near Dark, which we were talking about earlier, where it's like, oh, these guys aren't wealthy and affluent and
they're punk rockers
and living in some castle. They're kind of drifters. They're kind of cowboys. They're roaming the open plains, almost like drug addicts looking for their next fix. And you compare that to something like, one of the films tonight, Coppola's Dracula, which is very much the opposite. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance and sort of this broad operatic sort of aesthetic to it all, and it's very romantic in a way.
Yeah, it's like erotic art in the way.
It is, yeah, and I mean, even back further back, I think even going back to like the 60s, maybe even before that, when like LGBT sort of themes were not able to be discussed because of the Catholic Church and the Hays Code and things of that nature, you could get away with a lot of that by saying, well, they're vampires. You look at like actually some of the earliest depictions of lesbians on screen is through vampire films. And so I think it's really fascinating to kind of have this genre unto itself that is constantly evolving, that is so transgressive and at the forefront of really pushing the zeitgeist. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's fascinating.
Agreed. What about you, Devin? What's your fascination for vampire cinema? Why have you brought us here to watch 2 classics and Morbius? I'm sorry, 3 classics. What am I talking about?
Oh, yeah.
3 classics, yeah.
I don't know, but lesbian vampire seems to really, take the cake there. I want to suck your clit. No.
Oh my god. Well,
oh, it's so bloody down there.
I never
Twitter already.
Oh, I never read into the subtext of it personally. I mean, it's just something that I always had like a feigning interest to me. I think my interest really picked up with the Castlevania games.
Yep.
You guys remember those?
Oh yeah, I played Super Castlevania, Lords of Shadow. I played a few of them.
Yeah, I think the main one that I played was Castlevania 64, which a lot of people say was the worst one, but I loved it regardless. I got like a classic version of it on Game Boy. It was like just a port of the NES version. And I remember one of my speeches I did in school was on the entire history of Castlevania series.
That's a very interesting history there.
I even got a shirt made to go with it. It's because I was.
What was your grade?
What grade was it? I forget. I want to say like grade 2 or grade 3 or something.
No, I'm saying what did they rate your? Nice. What?
Hey Nathan, we hear your friends.
I'm not sure what I got, but I think Nathan's in the middle of a metal tour right now, so he's just popping in.
Yes, yeah. Nathan Shapiro, no relation to Ben.
No relation to Ben, not at all.
But
no.
Nathan, I was just talking about how back when I was in say grade 3, I did a whole speech and presentation on the Castlevania game series, and that's right about where my fascination with vampires kind of started.
Very cool.
Or Pete's rather, and I even had like a shirt made. I think I did decently with it. I think I got at least a 6.9, if not higher, for my my speech.
That's what I was gonna ask. Did you get an A? Or a type A?
Let's just say I did.
Okay, sure.
Nice.
Well, I kind of wanted to jump in here just briefly. I was going to say, as far as my introduction to the genre, mine was probably when I was a teenager. I discovered the anime Hellsing Ultimate, and then shortly after that,
great.
Yeah, no, it is. It's super well made, and I highly recommend it. but immediately after I saw that, when I was 14 or 15, I saw Robert Rodriguez from Dusk Till Dawn.
Oh,
And
yeah.
my teenage head just exploded. I was like, "This is the coolest thing ever!" It's, man,
it's a great movie.
It is. No, it is. Yeah.
It's okay.
So what about you, Nathan? Where does your fascination with vampires begin?
I was like from a very early age. I was always fascinated by like very macabre things, dark subject matter. So vampires sort of just came very natural to me. I always enjoyed the myths of the vampire, and also when I was like, oh God, I must have been 11, 10 maybe. I took a drawing class, and the focus was monsters, and I was particularly drawn to vampires. My fascination with Batman, probably from a very early age, is what led me to vampires, just because I saw a lot of similarities there, and I always enjoyed that. But I read Bram Stoker's Dracula on a flight to London a number of years ago, and I very much enjoyed the book. I always liked vampire movies. I always liked the myths and the subject matter, just because I thought it was cool how. Well, I also took a course on monsters in college. Now, the thing about monsters is that there's what's called Cohen's theses of monster, and the theses of monster dictate one of the tenets is that they are usually representative of a societal fear.
Yep.
or something like that. So vampires kind of came from the fear of sort of like a fear of sexuality or impurity. That's a lot of what those myths are derived from. And as you can see in I don't believe that I have time to discuss the entire to discuss all the films. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a little forward on vampires and some of the films. The monster culture, one of the theses are that they're a cultural mirror, and it stipulates that monsters are a reflection of their culture and mirror to the contemporary zeitgeist. They're also a temporal mirror, basically asserting that the monsters are elusive and shifty creatures. This thesis upholds that our creations are difficult to pin down and therefore must be examined within specific time periods, that it is always a reflection of its time. The monster is basically a defiance of what is possible. They lurk outside the gates of the possible. I'm not going to go into every single one of the theses, but these are just the top ones that come to mind. They exist just outside of the realm of possibility and feasibility for humans. But I liked the vampire as a metaphor for sexual impurity. I always thought that was fascinating, and it's very clear in the Dracula book and in numerous Dracula adaptations, because as you can see last year I did what I like to call the Dracuthon, and during this, I think it was over the course of maybe a week or two, I watched 5, maybe 6 different adaptations of the Dracula book, and I wanted to see which one was the most accurate. I'm sure everyone's seen Angry Video Game Nerds movie, not movie, video about about what the most accurate Dracula is, and it is the 1977 BBC made for TV adaptation But across these adaptations, Dracula preys primarily on young women, and as he as he infects them and sort of adds them to the fold of the vampire, you see them becoming a little more, how do I put this, sexually provocative, and that was the manifestation of, I guess, people around the time that the book was written's fear of you know fear of sexuality, which I think is still an enduring problem in today's society, is that people are scared of open sexuality, and I think that Dracula and the vampire is representative of that, which I find cool because I enjoy that shit.
Well, it's kind of like,
yeah.
Last week, actually, we reviewed Hellraiser, 1987, and that's not necessarily a vampire film, but, Ian was actually making parallels between that film and the aliens going on around in the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and so, I mean, I think I agree with you there that there is something about particularly that is able to tap into the zeitgeist in a way that other genres just are not able to.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot what is probably the most important thesis of Monster when discussing Dracula and when discussing vampires, is that the fear of the monster is actually a kind of desire, and that I think is probably the most prevalent thesis when it comes to discussing vampires and it comes to discussing Dracula, because as you can see as how well, I mean, a little bit of a spoiler, but like how Lucy behaves once she's bitten by Dracula, she's very, very open, and the vampire Dracula in the films and in the book has a kind of hypnotism that draws people in, so that that's one of the theses of Monster that I think that's the thesis that of Cohen's that vampires most embody, which I think is fun. But to get into to get into the films, I have seen Nosferatu with a live sorry, the tour bus is about to leave. Everyone's trying to get their smokes in.
You're a rock star, by the way. I mean, you're doing.
Yeah, where are you going? Tell us where you're
going. We just finished in Bratislava, Slovakia.
Wow.
And we are heading to Zwickau, Germany tomorrow for our penultimate show, and then Lindau, Germany for our final show the day after.
Hey.
You make any stops in Transylvania on this tour?
Hey.
For Halloween.
No,
come on. Boo.
What's
the
funny
point?
thing. Well, funny thing, our one of our songs is about vampires. The final song, not the final song, but the song before the last one. We have a song called "Forgetting the Light," which is about vampires.
Nice.
Very cool.
And I have a flagon full of blood that I drink from at the end of the set. I go, like tonight I was like, Bratislava, I drink your blood, and then I guzzle it down and like spit it all over the stage, and it's it gets a huge.
Nice.
The crowd loves it.
Which lucky Bratislavian did you get to donate his blood to you for
that? Whoever sold me that really shitty takeout that I got earlier today.
Oh, there you go. So some back alley deal, gotcha.
Yeah, little bit. Yeah.
But no, it's interesting. It's interesting how you mentioned, vampires. They embody kind of this prevalent fear in society, or even desire. Because there's been a lot of people have looked at
Nosferatu
and said these are very, exaggerated Jew stereotypes.
Oh, come on.
The argument can be made as a Jew myself not something that I really pay attention to.
Now, what they did was they saw a big nose and they thought, "Oh my God, it's a Jew."
Yeah,
well,
it's
also the fact that it's a German film from like the 20s, just before all that stuff
You
happened.
know,
I think there are different influences.
I don't think so.
Well, I think a big influence on Nosferatu in particular was what happened in the year 1918. There was a huge flu pandemic, and this was like this was the most dangerous like pandemic since like the Black Plague. Like I think it was even more dangerous than like COVID-19 itself because they didn't have measures behind it.
So there you go. Nosferatu
Yes,
as the embodiment.
exactly.
That's both as the embodiment of the plague, representative of the cultural fear at the time.
Exactly.
Not only the plague, but also consider the war. There's that.
Death was around every corner. Yeah. Like that's what drives Nosferatu, and I think the Black Plague was a huge influence on Dracula in and of itself, like the fear of this outside source coming from a different country in a different land, coming and contaminating you with a sickness that it brought from another country. That could be influenced by the war, that could be influenced by the 1918 flu pandemic. I don't really know, like, look, I'm all for art being up for interpretation, but as soon as you see, like, a person with a big nose that happens to be, like, greedy and ugly and think Jew, I mean, I'm not one to judge, but...
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think there is, as Nathan was saying, I mean, I think there's some merit to that interpretation. I mean, there's rumors that Stoker himself was influenced by a sort of anti-Semitic novel when he wrote Dracula. I will say that I think, particularly in the case of Nosferatu, at least, which was in part, I mean, a lot of these actors were Jewish themselves. I believe the director was actually a gay man later in life. He kind of discovered that about himself. I think this is more of a case of something that came after the fact. I think it's something like what we saw with The Matrix, where it's like people would try to take from that film and impose their own sort of bigoted worldview on it.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate, but it didn't too much color the experience for me.
Color. It's going.
No, I mean...
Speaking... I'm sorry. It's getting hard to hear with all the background noise, Nathan. I'm sorry.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Everyone's loading back on the... Everybody's loading themselves back on the tour bus.
Yeah, don't worry, man. Just wanted to let you know.
Living a dream, dude. I don't mean that sarcastically.
Speaking of Nosferatu, let's introduce Nosferatu. Devin, take it away. Spoilers for all films, by the way, as if you could spoil a 100-year-old movie based off a 100-plus-year-old book.
I'm probably going to have to jump off. Before this, I'll just give a quick forward about the. Do you mind if I give a quick forward about the two films that I have seen?
Go
for it.
Shoot.
Yeah.
And I'll say a little bit about Morbius too. But no, I saw Nosferatu a couple of years ago with a live orchestra accompanying it, and I thought it was just a visually stunning film. Very eerie, very creepy, great atmosphere. One of the best adaptations of the vampire myth that I had ever seen, and a perfect. And a German expressionist masterpiece. Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, I think, is one of the best adaptations of Bram Stoker's novel. However, maybe not the most accurate, certainly the most visually striking, I would say. And according to Cinemassacre, the second most accurate Dracula adaptation, but I thought that the performances were fantastic. I think that it adds an interesting ethos to Dracula, and I think it's just visual. Both of these are very visually striking films and add a lot of color and personality to the Dracula vampire story. Morbius is an adaptation of a third tier Marvel character longtime Spider-Man villain. I don't know why they made this movie.
Money.
I haven't fucking seen it. Our bassist watched it on the plane over here, but it exists. It exists.
Is one of the movies of all time.
Yeah.
Time.
It's I hear it's up for like all the Morb awards this year.
Yeah, it's already nominated for the Oscars, despite the Oscars.
It made more billions of dollars at the box office. So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here. Nathan, I mean, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Oh, of course.
I really appreciated that whole. I mean, you've got some of the real history down about this stuff. This is what we needed. We need an expert,
Well, the weird,
you're not a vampire yourself.
It's almost like you're a vampire yourself.
Exactly.
The kids in middle school used to call me one because I was pale and wore all black.
That's racist.
No, but yeah, no. The funny thing about all this stuff is that most of my college education was spent analyzing mythology and medieval literature, and when I tell people about the classes that I did take in college, they wonder if I even went to school at all.
Very nice.
But shouts out Gant Gurley from the University of Oregon for his amazing monsters class that was very informative and helped dictate a lot of the things that I have spoken on this here episode. So my information is not entirely useless.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it, man.
All right. Well, we're about to hit the road. Thank you guys, and have a morbing good time.
Rock on.
Hell yeah, we'll do.
Yeah. Good luck.
Later.
So Nosferatu, Devin, take her away.
Nosferatu is a 1922 film directed by
F.W. Murnau.
F.W. Murnau. Yes. He's a German filmmaker who made this film. I believe this film arguably started the whole German expressionist movement.
Yep.
Or maybe The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari maybe is more credited to that.
Mm-hmm.
But this film is an absolutely quintessential staple of the horror genre. And I think we all try to remember our first time seeing this reference in pop culture was probably in SpongeBob.
Yeah, I was waiting for someone to bring it up.
Reference.
Which is such an iconic reference, and it was genuinely creepy, even in the context of that silly show. But it made me curious, who is this Nosferatu guy?
Nosferatu, yeah. And here's the thing, that's a kid's cartoon written by adults that somehow understand 20s film references and old characters and putting them in their kids' cartoon.
I mean, I'm not surprised, really. It's such a iconic. If they went to film school or if they were involved any, being production of animation, I'm sure they're well read on all these kind of references.
They must.
But it's fun that they snuck that. It's fun that they snuck that into a kids' cartoon just to make it relevant and to our generation more or less. But no, I appreciated seeing it back then and seeing the film. With all that in mind, and the fact that this is 100 years old is insane. I remember actually my first time seeing the whole thing was on YouTube back when you were just starting to able to put full films or full length videos on the website. Like back then, most you could ever put on before that was just 10 minutes, right? If you remember those days. And that felt like a long video back then. But then I remember stumbling across Nosferatu 1922, an hour and something minutes. Like, holy shit, there's whole movies on this website now? This is going to change everything.
Yeah.
And look at us now. We're now probably 10 years after that and 100 years after the film actually came out, physically in real cinemas, talking about it, which is crazy. But
I mean, it is really cool that 100 years later, people are still talking about this film. I think all of us here are probably, myself especially, but I'm sure you guys as well are interested in, being in the film industry, actually making, writing and directing. And I think what an honor it would be for any of us to have a film that's still discussed 100 years after we released it. I mean, that's the ultimate legacy in a way.
Which is the legacy, I think, Robert Rodriguez and what's his name?
John Malkovich. Yeah.
I think they're hoping to make something that's relevant in 100 years. It almost feels like a prank at this point that they made a film and they're not going to release it for 100 years. It's just going to sit in a vault long after it's relevant. And I'm like, are they really that afraid of criticism to not even put it out?
That didn't even happen. I think they shot a commercial and made up a cool story. Is what I think happened. But I don't know.
That sounds right.
I don't know. I mean, but seriously. I mean, to create something bigger than yourself is really phenomenal.
This is true.
And I did watch this film. It's available for free on YouTube. I can say that it's within the public domain. So I mean, even I found it interesting. The Wikipedia page actually linked the full length film, which normally you don't see, but this is well within public domain by now. They have actually remade this film at least once already, and Robert Eggers, who did The Northman, The Lighthouse, The Witch, is planning. Yeah, is The Witch. He's now planning a remake himself. So I mean, I am ecstatic about making sure I see the Nosferatu the first day it releases.
No, and I think that'd be really cool to see. I'd love to see Robert Eggers' take on this. I know Werner Herzog did a version, which I am still really needing to watch.
Yes, you do.
Yeah, it's just Nathan just posted a second thesis over the monster always escapes. Says that while the damage caused by a monster remains, the monster itself vanishes only to reappear somewhere else in another place or time. No matter how many times we kill the monster, it reappears to haunt us, to draw attention to itself, to make us examine it within the contemporary social, culture, and literary historical context. And it goes on from there. But yeah, really fascinating stuff. And it's interesting that, the reason that this is called Nosferatu, the original book is Dracula, obviously, but the reason it was called Nosferatu was because they didn't want to be infringed upon copyright, and they wanted to adapt the story, but they weren't able to, I guess, legally require it. I'm not sure what the story behind that is. I probably should have researched it, but that's where they kind of reinvented all the names, but more or less the story is intact. Although according to Cinemassacre's list that we mentioned before, this is actually the least faithful to the book, which is interesting, or has like the most changes in it.
Probably to avoid that copyright, right? Like,
yeah, well, and the Stoker estate was still none too happy with this adaptation. It's actually a miracle that it survived all these
Bram
years
Stoker
later.
like walked out in the middle of the movie and basically told people not to see it. Basically told people like, don't watch this. It's a ripoff.
It's so crazy to me that he was alive to see this one too. Like, that's wild.
It is kind of wild, yeah.
It just shows how far back we go with this movie. Well, what you guys think? Watching it 100 years later, does it hold up?
I'm gonna be honest. I don't know that it holds up. Honestly, I think as a piece of art, as a piece of history, it's 100 years old. I think it's phenomenal. I mean, I think when I watch this film, and it's like especially if you're tuned in to like the filmmaking aspects and stuff, it's like watching things from 100 years ago that would almost become mainstream in a genre that, as I said earlier, is like constantly reinventing itself. That's like fascinating because you can pick up little snippets of other films that would come after the fact. And I mean, I think it's, I think it's phenomenal in the context of a historical piece of art, really. As a narrative film, it's okay. I don't know that I would revisit it anytime soon. It's a little, it's one of those where it's kind of basic. I mean, and it's like, the problem is, the narrative only feels basic because of all these things that have come out after the fact. So it's almost hard to hold that against it.
But you also can't shake the feeling. I think a big font, that was running through my head the entire time watching it. It was just like, this doesn't feel like the right time to make this movie. And, well, we talked about The Passion of Joan of Arc on the channel before, and, wow, that film is crazy far ahead of its time. It also is a narrative that works much better in the silent film structure. Like, there aren't as many sets and locations, there's only a few characters, there's a lot of close-ups, so you could probably, shoot it anywhere you want and not have to worry about, the mise-en-scene too much, or getting a bunch of extras together only for a certain few scenes, whereas this film is much more ambitious. We're talking so many different sets, tons of, extras when they're walking out the caskets in the middle of the streets, and I think they shot on a lot of real locations too. It was very ambitious, which is admirable, but the technology just wasn't quite there yet to tell the story, which is why I think Werner Herzog's version works much better. I actually watched that remake, and I think it might be up there with The Faint as one of the best remakes ever made, because there's so much potential with this film that just couldn't really be explored with the sound film aspect, in my opinion. Not just with how it looks. Visually the film is stunning, but more so talk about some of the technical limitations might affect the narrative in general. The pacing of this film is so rushed. So many scenes just fly by way too fast. I think part of that is because you can only capture so much film on an older camera. Either that, or they just didn't know how to pace a film back then. But a film like this really needs to build on that atmosphere and build on the tension of this mysterious creature. But you never really get a feeling of that throughout the entire movie, because the whole film just feels like it's rushing to the finish line. And I think part of that is because it's held back by the technology. If they waited 30 or 40 years to make it, like with Werner Herzog's version, that film really draws out the atmosphere. And I know you hate the word slow burn, Stephen, but I think it really works for this story because it needs it desperately.
Hey, I actually love a good slow burn film. I mean, I have my issues with, certain horror movies that ascribe that sort of tagline to them, because it usually means something else entirely. But I digress. No, I think, and again, I kind of feel similar to where you're coming from, Ian, because I wanted to love this film, and I also was kind of having trouble with maybe trying to change the frame rate a little bit on YouTube as well, because there is that issue with pacing, but at the end of the day, it's hard to hold those things against it,
because they didn't really know better back then. They were
it's 100 years old, right? Yeah. So it's how much of this is the fault of the filmmakers,
Well, you have to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the people that were around at the time. They didn't really see anything like this before, and that's really something to consider when you watch this thing. I mean, in a modern context, this has been, parodied, and it's been borrowed from, and it's been improved upon significantly since, that it's hard to kind of go back and in retrospect and really kind of fully realize maybe the impact of it, just because it's been so ubiquitous, right? And that's something to always take in consideration. It is, I think it still holds that novelty of oh, this is the first vampire film, and it may, only hold as much, notoriety in that regard in these days, but you have to consider what it was like at the time coming out. And
no, yeah. This was actually quite, scandalous for its time. I mean, this really had not been done before. I think this may be the earliest example, if not one of the earliest examples of horror. Never mind vampires, but just the
at
genre.
least horror that's like survived too. Like there's so many films that were also made at the time that just didn't survive. Like there was another Cinemaster video that started autoplaying after I finished the Dracula one, and he was talking about lost films, and one of them was there was a 1916 adaptation of Phantom of the Opera, and you might think, why would they do like a musical? Back then. But
Right.
actually, I'm not even sure if that was even considered a musical or just a play at that point. But it probably would have been accompanied with live music. But it almost seems like that's too early for that film to exist. But
Yeah.
and it did exist, but we don't really have like a great copy of it around anymore, unfortunately. But it would be still interesting to see what they came up with then and how that might have been improved upon later on with other adaptations.
Sure, and I mean it's also worth noting, and I think this also kind of squashes the sort of idea that this film was intentionally anti-Semitic, is that the screenplay for this film was written by a Jewish man who also wrote a film from 1915, which was called Der Golem, or The Monster of Fate. And it's also been partially lost, but it was about the Jewish folk tale of a rabbi who created the golem to protect his tribe of people. And it's like this, monstrous sort of creature of clay. And, it ties into the persecution of Jews and this sort of rumors of blood libel. And now here's this sort of silent clay protector of the people. And I mean, it is always fascinating to go back and look at stuff like that and see just how far we've come. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little, but as it comes to Nosferatu, I mean, I do agree that it's probably a little dated in terms of modern sensibilities. I think your mileage is going to vary, but I'm not. I'm not mad about having seen it. Quite the opposite. I really enjoyed this as a piece of history, and I think anyone who is pursuing filmmaking should have an understanding of this kind of stuff, because it's really not a question of, well, do I love it? Do I enjoy it? Is it one of my favorite movies? It's just the history and the art of what they were able to accomplish 100 years ago with nothing like what we have now.
And I think also this film, for people that are starting out, like for me, this was actually quite inspiring when I was starting out and looking into film as something fascinating. Like films like this don't have a super, like, at least by today's standards, a super high production value. And the way they did some of the effects can be kind of transparent and kind of easy to digest and understand. There's something very elemental about it, and that's what I love about watching old films, is that like some of the effects are obvious, like what they did, but they are effective still with how cheap they are, and it's that accessibility and understanding of, oh, that's just like wires, or that's makeup, or they put a light on the ground to exaggerate the shadows, and then you start to think, oh, I could do this kind of thing and have it create a similar kind of effect if I wanted to make my own little horror movie. And I love, films like this that are kind of accessible in terms of how it was made. There, it's well, you know, it's well written about, that you can read every aspect about how it was put together, and it's in the public domain, so anybody can watch it. And and anyone that is interested in film history or wants to make stuff themselves, I think it's almost essential viewing, just to really start to learn the fundamentals of, okay, how does the horror genre work, or where, like, what established the kind of story beats that we see in horror films.
Well, and again, I mean, that ties in too to like the legacy and the other films that this has affected. I mean, I actually saw Rick Baker, who, if you don't know who that is, he's one of the most talented and well-known special effects artists in the industry. and he did, pretty much all of the original Star Wars films. He did An American Werewolf in London, Videodrome, The Exorcist, and I was watching him interviewed actually on Joe Rogan of all places, and he was talking about what an influence Nosferatu was on his career, and how that he had never quite put together what he wanted to do in life until he saw this movie and was like, I want to create these creatures. And I mean, that's
admirable.
I think that's really where this film shines, is just
its influence,
the legacy.
Culture. Yeah, like it's influenced so many filmmakers, so many, like they reference Nosferatu and Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like there's that infamous shot of like the shadow of Nosferatu like slowly holding out his claw-like hands. Like that's in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like a movie that's more faithful to the book, referencing the least faithful adaptation just because the filmmaker was influenced by it so much and had a love and passion for it, that in what's gonna be like the most accurate version, he's like, you know what, screw you, Bram Stoker, I'm referencing Nosferatu.
I mean, it's like the imagery is just so influential in this film, and I think that can't be understated.
Yeah, it's incredibly stunning for its time.
Timeless. Is really
just
what
to
it
show, just to prove like how effective it was for its time. This movie was banned in Sweden for excessive horror, and that wasn't lifted until 1972. So for 50 years, this film was too hot for Sweden.
Yeah, like the imagery is great. The cinematography is pretty solid at certain points. Some of the makeup looks a little bit goofy, but it kind of works. Like especially for the Nosferatu himself. Like the eyeshadow was a little silly, but it works in the black and white format. Like anytime they change like the color filters, it's a little more noticeable. But in black and white, it's like, yeah, that fits perfectly. Like that.
Oh yeah,
and I can't even be mad
this film is
that's
better.
The intended format. Yeah.
This film is better with the color filters because it kind of cues you into what's supposed to be daylight and what's supposed to be nighttime. I mean, film cameras back in the 1920s, or I should say film stock, was not very light sensitive, so they could not film at night because there just wasn't enough light to expose the film. So there's a lot of day for night cinematography that's a bit confusing unless you have like the color filters kind of cue you. If it's orange, it's daytime. If it's blue, it's nighttime. If you just watch it in plain black and white, it's a little confusing because you see him kind of wandering around the daylight, and he's not getting burned by the sunlight.
Yeah.
So
it's a little different.
Yeah, but
sure.
that's just the thing, and there's been so many like versions of this that circulated around. I mean, even though they changed the names of all the characters, Bram Stoker was his little estate was nonplussed about it, and all the original copies with like the subtitles were burned. Except there was this one that was just sitting around that no one noticed, so they managed to restore it from that copy. It's really fascinating how that all goes about. But yeah, they were not too concerned with film preservation back then, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't know if I agree. Like, here's the thing. Like, yeah, the color filters definitely help, but it was shot on black and white cameras, and it was intended for black and white.
No, black and white is all, black and white was the only format that existed then.
I know.
And the color filters were part of the original were part of the original theatrical run. That was intentional.
Really?
To distinguish day and night. Yes.
Huh.
Because if you just watch in straight black and white, you can tell it's all shot in the day.
Well,
because of that technical limitation. So the color filters were intended to help distinguish day from night.
Yeah, that's interesting because I kind of found like the color filters brought out like not the mistakes, but like some of the more dated aspects of the presentation, the makeup a little bit more. So I assumed like it was originally black and white, but to kind of like quote unquote improve it, like happens with silent films all the time. They added in filters later.
Yeah, like technically it was all shot in black and white because that's all they had. But ever since that, people have tried to paint in film.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
We've seen this with George Lumiere's films where they hand painted some elements in those, and experimental films have always tried to add color in after the fact, until they actually were able to develop.
They also
color film.
did that with with Reefer Madness, 1930s film, but
the
they released the color run, which was a nice version where all the weed smoke is like different colors and stuff, and it's goofy, but I mean
the movie's goofy.
Yeah, that's more of a modern phenomenon. No, I mean, it feels very straightforward as an adaptation of Dracula. I mean, you have this sort of monstrous creature, this vampire, this otherworldly thing who is from Transylvania, and he's trying to buy real estate, and it's like all of the sort of story beats are there. And I think it's kind of fascinating that Nosferatu has kind of become his own character, because the story is basically
Dracula.
It's basically just Dracula, but I think the creature design itself is maybe what's been able to differentiate Nosferatu and be so timeless. I know even in what was it, 1979, don't get me lying here, directed by Tobe Hooper off the success of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, actually adapted Stephen King's novel, which was about vampires in this small town, and he also sort of used the Nosferatu design, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about. But it is interesting that you have this fundamentally similar property that is almost it's Dracula, all but down to this one change in presentation, this certain specific look, and that alone has been enough to sort of carry it through the years. I think that is really fascinating on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will admit, though, my experience may have been partially soured by the version I watched, because I think this was the version you posted, Devin, because the music I found in that version was very unfitting. Like, it was like, it seemed like way too happy in most cases. Like, it was like a soundtrack from The Wizard of Oz. There's one shot in particular where he spots, the main character spots Nosferatu outside his door and, like, closes it for the first time. Like, that iconic sequence, and the music, like, starts off creepy, but then it goes like do 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 do. I'm like, wait a minute, this is the first.
I found some of the cues were not fitting for sure, and I think I bounced between a couple different versions actually, just because.
Yeah, and after that,
can completely change your view of it, especially with these old silent films. And I found actually, like Passion of the Jonah Ark, when we watched that film, there was a version that I started to watch where the music was like and then I found like the more official version that Criterion released, and the music made it so much better. Like the version that they put in that, it just kept it so engaging. You can tell that they made it to really fit that screen.
Yeah, the music makes a huge difference, because like when I was finished with this, I watched the version Steven posted for like 20 minutes, and the music was so much better. Like, it was really creepy, it was really disturbing. It was like this droning soundtrack that plays whenever Nosferatu, whenever you can feel his presence. Like, it added to the atmosphere so much more. And it didn't just feel like a generic orchestral score that felt like it was meant for a completely different movie. So I think my experience admittedly may have been partially soured by that. I will put that out there.
Well, I think this just goes to show you that I'm always right. So I mean, this is
don't push your luck.
Which you are.
Fair enough. No, I mean, is there anything else that we should add here? I mean, I'm wondering if we need to get to ratings. We're probably behind on time a little bit.
Let's give it our ratings. It's fascinating work of art. Beautifully shot. Make sure to find a version with good music if you're gonna watch it. Do not watch whatever version Devin posted. I forget what that is, but I'll put a link in the description. Do not watch that version because the music is hilariously bad. But I have to admit, like, the pacing was way too rushed. Some aspects were unintentionally silly, and I think that it is kind of held back by the fact that it's a product of its time, when Passion of Joan of Arc didn't feel like that at all in comparison. I'm kind of interested to see a Vampire turns out, which I think was directed by who directed that one? I think it was the same guy who did M, if I'm not mistaken. Let me check the director.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, correct me if I'm wrong in the chat. Oh no, this is a different director, but it still looks interesting. I'll give that film a try, see if that holds up a little bit better. Anyways, I'm giving Nosferatu a 6.9 out of 10. I'm glad I watched it, but I'm probably not gonna rush to watch it again outside of a few scenes. Maybe.
This is one of those things that's in the public domain, and the imagery is iconic. This is something that if you're like a video glitch artist or you do anything with video and you just need like copyright-free footage that is creepy for Halloween, perfect source material.
Right.
And I think, and this is something I'd 100% use as like a budgeting video artist. You know, this is perfect imagery to steal from, to repurpose. So I think 6.9 is very apt, at the very least, for that.
Fair enough. What about you,
Yeah,
Steven?
I'll go ahead and give this a 7. I'm saving the meme review number for later, which we'll get into.
Fair enough.
But yeah, this is a solid 7. I don't know when I don't know when I'd ever revisit this, but I'm really happy to have seen it.
And I'm giving Werner Herzog's Nosferatu a 9 out of 10. Go watch that.
Wow.
Holy crap, what a movie. And that's also free on YouTube. Watch it before copyright takes it down.
Which is interesting, because Werner Herzog credits... Yeah, Werner Herzog likes to say that Nosferatu, the original, is the greatest German film ever made. So, I wonder what compelled him to remake it then.
Well, maybe it's a case of like somebody pushed it around, and maybe it was a case of like Denis Villeneuve of Blade Runner 2049, where he made it so nobody else could make it. But I mean, honestly, he did a great job of the source material, so definitely recommend that one. And up next on our schedule, Fiend's get a little more horny because it's the 90s with Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, yes.
This is such a horny film.
Holy shit. Yeah, it's the 90s, man.
Bram Stoker's, sorry.
No, I think you had it right the first time.
Oh, shit. Bram Stoker's Dracula. It is continuing a long tradition of non-horror filmmakers making some of the goddamn best horror movies you've ever seen. William Friedkin was famously a documentary filmmaker before he, hit it big with The Exorcist. Jordan Peele was kind of a sketch show comedian, almost doing what Dave Chappelle did. And then it's like, oh man, here's Get Out. And here we have Francis Ford Coppola, who really, up until this point, was kind of going through a rough patch. He did the first 2 Godfather films. He did The Conversation. He did Apocalypse Now. And then, for the most part, the films that were in between this and Apocalypse Now, I mean, they were not critical darlings. They were not well received.
They're all fantastic films off the bat. I mean, Godfather 1 and 2 are and Conversation.
I'm talking about after Apocalypse Now. You had Rumblefish and the Cotton Club, and
The Outsiders
films
was
that
pretty
were
good.
Yeah, but nothing quite to the level of his really peak run.
Oh, absolutely.
And so his company was facing bankruptcy. It's 1990. What can you do? He releases The Godfather Part 3,
because everyone needed money.
which was not well received. And then in 1992, he releases this film. What is it about? Well, it's a retelling of the Dracula novel. There is an added sort of romance plot that differs from the books in a way.
There's a lot of stuff added to this that differs from the book, but it's also, according to Cinemaster, the second most faithful adaptation, which is really interesting.
Yes, and it features some of the best performances I've ever seen. Gary Oldman, Anthony Hopkins, I mean, they are on a whole different level from pretty much everyone in the cast besides them, which we'll get into. And yeah, I mean, this was really a surprise film for me. I did not expect to love this, but by the end of it, I came out of it, I absolutely loved it. I think it's brilliant. I was listening to the, Red Letter Media review that they posted on this film. And something they brought up is that this is a film by filmmakers for filmmakers. And they were talking about all of the different intricate effects that were done, the shadow puppetry, the way that there's like an entire scene shot with like an old school crank camera. There's like this combination of genres where it's like, yes, you have the 1920s sort of expressionist, the callbacks to the original Nosferatu. But at the same time, you have this like weird 70s exploitation kind of, moments in there. It is very horny. It's a very brutal. I was surprised at how like some of this was pretty violent and terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
There's a whole sequence in the beginning with Gary Oldman drinking from this cross that is vomiting blood, and it feels like it belongs in a Sam Raimi film.
This whole movie honestly felt like a Sam Raimi movie. Like there's elements of it felt really
loved it.
How does he get away with it?
Yeah, that's true. Francis has to answer for his crimes now. For Sam Raimi.
I am so curious to hear you guys' thoughts. What are we thinking, guys?
I remember. So I'll tell you a fun story. I remember, like I said, back in the day, I was fascinated with vampires. I was really into the Castlevania games and other mythos. I even had this like vampire journal that I bought from Liquidation World, which had this like kind of outer 3D hand bursting or coming out of a coffin kind of cool thing, which is cool. And I was just rewriting my own version of the Castlevania games. Like if I were making my own version of this, it was basically like lifting the source material and just changing the names, kind of like Nosferatu. That was the peak of my creativity then. But I remember watching this and renting it from Blockbuster, or maybe it was Gone Hollywood Video, one of the two. I remember watching this when I was really, really young, way too young. And I was like really into it. But I think the second some titties popped on the screen, my mom's like, "No, you're not watching that. It's going back tomorrow." I'm like, "Oh man." So this is the first time I had be able to sit and watch the whole thing because I'm a grown ass adult and I can watch these movies now. And man, this movie is incredibly horny.
Oh
It is
yeah.
very
Hey,
horny.
it's the 90s, man.
It's fantastic. I think the one thing though about the whole the three gypsies, that like Dracula's concubines that are draining Keanu Reeves of his vitality. I guess that was the real
Of
danger
his bodily
of that scene.
fluids.
Oh yeah, it's draining him of his precious bodily fluids. So it's like, God, this is terrifying. Why am I into it?
By the way, one of those brides of Dracula is actually Monica Bellucci.
Yep.
Which
wow.
Well, I was thinking it's supposed to be me. No, no, I'm kidding.
He's literally me.
He's literally me. Yes. Reminds me of the old joke that did you hear? Monica Bellucci is having a child. If it's a girl, they'll name it after the mother, Monica. And if it's a boy, they'll name it after the father. Lucky bastard. Anyway. No, I mean, getting away from sort of the male gaze elements of this film, I thought, all jokes aside, I mean, I thought this was a phenomenal film. I was really surprised by it. It works when it shouldn't. The only thing, and I know people kind of harp on this, and I think it's unfair to a large extent, is that I think Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins are just so good that everyone else sort of pales in comparison.
Hey.
And Keanu Reeves gets, yeah, I know.
Oh,
Keanu Reeves gets a lot of...
But even though he's probably the real vampire in the story.
Yeah, I guess he doesn't react to anything. Stephen, I think there's a reason you mentioned great performances, Anthony Hopkins and Gary Oldman, full stop, is because we gotta address the elephant in the room. Keanu Reeves and Winona Ryder are so bad.
Winona Ryder was fine.
What? I will fight you. No, I will fight you. I will fight you. She was not good. I'm sorry, man.
Bitch.
Like, I walked away from this movie thinking, you know what? I don't know if Winona Ryder is much of an actress. I'm sorry. Like, she is so...
Okay, but...
Her accent felt like something out of a parody.
There's one redeeming factor in all this. The face she makes when she's sucking the blood out of Gary Oldman's torso.
I mean, yeah, sure, it's hot, I guess, but...
This film is super horny enough already.
Oh, God, that's so... I'm sorry, they were just... You know one thing you don't do? Because Francis Ford Coppola openly admitted that he was having concerns about Keanu Reeves' acting while filming this, and to some credit, Keanu Reeves apologized for his performance in this movie. I feel like Winona Ryder owes me one too, but we'll put a pin in that. Is, you know what you don't do when you think your actors are bad? You don't also give them a British accent that they can't do. Why did they have to be... Not everybody is British in this movie. Why did they have to be British? Why did you have to make the two awful lead actors British in this fucking movie?
I want to kind of address something here. So, Coppola was not really sold on Keanu Reeves.
No shit.
Actually, well, no, just hear me out. Because actually, how this all came about was when Coppola was doing The Godfather 3, he wanted Winona Ryder for the part that his daughter would infamously play. And it didn't work out, and critics absolutely destroyed Sophia's performance, Sofia Coppola. But Winona Ryder later approached Coppola and said, hey, somebody handed me this Dracula script. Why don't you do it? And so they wound up working together. So Winona Ryder was sort of like, she was for the hot young people. Like, that was because a lot of people didn't quite believe in this script. It was like, well, let's get some hot, young, fresh talent to really put a face to this for the young people to go see this. We know we have Gary Oldman. We know we have Anthony Hopkins. We have the veteran actors. Let's try and put some people in here that are like new blood, so to speak, and really promote this to kids. And Winona Ryder was sort of attached already, but Coppola actually wanted Johnny Depp.
Yep.
The problem was that the studio came back and said, we want someone who is more handsome.
Wait, what?
And so they 90s Johnny Depp, he wasn't doing it for him. So they were like, Keanu Reeves, he's popular. And that's how we got Keanu Reeves.
That's kind of a problem I have with that, though, is that they valued, like, profitability over integrity. Like, if you're gonna cast young, hot actors, that's fine, but there's gotta be better actors than that, man. I love Keanu. Well, he's a wholesome Chad, but he's not an actor. And this movie really cements that. This movie reminded me that he should not be playing characters like this. We're reacting to all these strange, horrible things as a key component of his character because he doesn't react to anything.
To me, Keanu Reeves, and I used to be where you are, Ian. I used to think, oh my God,
I like where this is going.
Reeves is the worst actor ever.
He's the best person, but the worst actor.
No. Here's the problem. People think he's a bad actor. The problem is he's a great actor in a very limited range. Keanu Reeves is a lot like Steve McQueen, because a lot of his acting is it's stoicism, it's what's not being said, it's kind of his eyes and the way he emotes to things. And the problem with this film is they're demanding a lot of him. They're having him be super expressive. They're having him like emote. They're having him try to do this British accent. And I don't know what his direction was. I'm not going to pretend that he's giving a great performance here. It's not his best. But I also, I find it hard to hold against him too much, because this is just not a Keanu Reeves part.
And not at all.
It's not his part. He needs... Now, I could see him doing something like this if you had like a stoic, imagine John Wick, but it's Van Helsing.
Yeah, he should have been Van Helsing, if anything, honestly.
No, I mean, that sort of like stoic, just do what needs to be done kind of guy. But if you're having him give these long-winded monologues in a British accent, it doesn't work. Yeah, and I don't know how much of that is his fault.
Well, he also admitted that he was like between so many different films at the time, and he was like really exhausted because he was practically like bouncing between sets. But if that's the case, I think that's further proof that he should not have been playing this character. You should have just gotten a different actor. And Winona Ryder, a lot of people say like,
well,
she's decent.
He had a less prominent role in this film than I realized. Like, I had only seen the first half of it up until the gypsy scene when I was younger, so I thought that he would have had a more prominent role throughout the whole thing. But like after the second half, you don't really see him too much actually.
Yeah. But Winona Ryder unfortunately gets a lot of screen time.
I kind of hated that they just like dropped his storyline entirely. I know his performance might not be the best, but he does kind of get he gets sidelined in a way that is not it's kind of unsatisfying from a narrative perspective.
It almost feels like a rewrite. Like they're just like, all right, you're just gonna be at the castle for a while Gary Oldman tries to bane your wife. Like you're just gonna hang out over there for a while. Like it does feel kind of disrespectful. Like, yeah, he was a terrible performance, but you're Francis Ford Coppola. Get him to do a good performance. Like, you gotta work with that a little bit. You can't just be like, we're gonna pretend you're not in a movie for a while.
I do actually know that, just reading online, that I think there may have been some on-set drama between Keanu and Coppola, because particularly there was a scene where the original ending was written so that Winona Ryder would transform into a pile of rats. And that was going to be her big ending, that she was just going to disappear into this pile of rats. And so Coppola was telling all of the people on the cast and crew to verbally berate her and like try to get her to cry, like just be so mean to her that she would cry, like a Stanley Kubrick sort of thing. And Keanu Reeves refused, which is so based and such a Chad move to just be like, no, I'm not going to do that. That's, horrific. That's, you can't abuse some woman on a movie set. But
and that's the thing too.
We're talking about Winona Ryder here, not what's her name.
Yeah, and again, like if you're going to get an actress that needs to cry on command, get an actress who, again, it's further proof that she should not be in this movie. Like the whole time I was just thinking, like, you really wanted her to be in The Godfather Part 3, the ending to like the epic mafia movie trilogy that's been building up over these past few years, and you gave her like a lead role in this. I'm just like, what do you see in her, Francis? Like, I'm sorry, like, what do you see in this woman?
I mean, I'm not too interested in tearing down Winona Ryder and Keanu Reeves. I mean,
they're great
at the
people.
end of the day,
they're not great actors.
Well, at the end of the day, it's like, are they really bad actors, or is Coppola just not able to direct them? You know, like, I mean, maybe it just, I don't know, maybe his style didn't lend itself to the range that they're used to. I don't know. But, I mean, aside from admittedly a very mixed range of performances, I thought the film itself was great. I thought the narrative was compelling. The sort of technical elements. I mean, everything was just phenomenal, and the score. I don't even have to explain myself there. The score is fantastic. Like, everything about this film is pretty much everything you could hope for from a gothic romance horror fantasy from the 90s, in particularly, that you could ask for.
Yeah, like, the presentation of this film is, like, easily the best part about it. Like, I wasn't expecting, like, so much creativity in the presentation, and it does feel like a little bit, not, I don't mean this as a complaint necessarily, because it's very experimental, and he's never done a horror film before, so I'm definitely gonna come some slack. It feels a little tech demo-ish at times, where, like, they'll try something really cool with the visuals, even if it doesn't really fit, but I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. Like, I don't know why, like, the peacock eye had to cover the screen and transition to an eye, but it looks cool. Like, I don't know why, like, you had to randomly...
the transitions in this were fantastic. I loved... It's so like Nosferatu... Okay, I forgot to mention how cool some of the transitions were in Nosferatu, particularly, like, the castle to, like, the silhouette of the person. But Francis Ford Coppola just took that element, that visual element, that inspired the whole imagery of Dracula, and just took it up to 11.
Pumped it right up.
I absolutely appreciated that.
Absolutely, and I don't know why you had to use, like, old-timey footage for a certain scene and cut away from it, but it looks cool. Like, it's so hard to argue about, like, the logic or the story purpose. Yeah, because it works so well. And the fact that, like, he's never done a horror movie before, so he's probably like, okay, like, I gotta test.
No, I don't think that's true. I think he did some low budget horror films, like, way back in the day. Like, there was this one called Dementia 13, I think.
Okay, but this is like his first big budget horror film off an iconic story. So he probably just wanted to, like, up his, like, visual game a little bit. Like, this can't be like The Godfather.
What about the whole what about that whole, like, miniature train, and the train is casting a shadow on the diary? Like,
that's so cool. Like, I don't know how you come up with stuff like
that.
It's
so cool.
Like, that's where I got the Raimi vibes, where it's like, that's something you'd see in, like, Spider-Man or like really goofy horror movies. Not really like a serious horror movie based on Dracula. And not to say that horror movies aren't well shot, but I think I've never really seen, like, a big budget Hollywood horror movie that's, like, this inventive with its transitions and editing and the use of shadows in particular. Like, sometimes they form into different shapes, but I don't know if you noticed the shadows of the people dancing, but when Dracula gets, like, this really depressing letter about when Lucy basically telling him that this isn't going to work out, the dancers actually go slower until nobody's dancing anymore. Like, so many cool little details for the visual effects and the editing, the cinematography itself is great.
They kind of talked about that too in the Red Letter Media review, where they were talking about there's a scene where Dracula enters a party, and in the background there's a TV that's playing a sort of, or not TV, I guess it would be like a projector.
Yeah.
But it's playing this old-timey sort of naughty film,
Oh yeah,
like it's like, this guy's got a hot lady on his wife, and then it, like, switches to an old lady, and he's, like, all disappointed.
And then it shows the shadow puppets of the war that he experienced in the past.
When Dracula enters the room, though, it becomes way more, like, dark and sexual and, like, disturbing. Like, the pornography is more violent or something, as if Dracula is influencing his environment. And it's just little tiny touches like that, even in the background, that you could like blink and miss, that really set this film apart for me. I did not expect this film to go this hard.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I love how they tied in Vlad the Impaler's actual story to his actual backstory. Yeah. Like that just seems like something that should have been done before, but wasn't, because it ties
that's
perfectly
the
to
other
his
thing.
character.
It's like it ties that mythos together, which is really fascinating, and I was always interested in like the real
also
history
the imagery
of it,
in that opening is like the red.
I'm not as well read about it as
yeah.
Mr. Stink over here probably is, so I'm sure he can enlighten us in a moment. But one thing this is what Cinemaster talked about, is that this film is the second most faithful of the adaptations in terms of like having elements in the book presented on the film, but it's also the most inventive in terms of like changing things. Like there's the whole origin story of Dracula is not in the book whatsoever, but I absolutely love that like mythos of him kind of feeling betrayed by his church, and his lover had killed herself while he was away in battle. And that imagery of him just like stabbing to the cross and it bleeding out was like terrifying. That like stuck with me. Just having like inanimate objects bleed like that was such a wild idea for me when I was really young.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
it's like a stigmata in a way,
and also
a stigmata, or like I think Evangelion kind of takes that too, actually. That idea.
That wouldn't surprise me. And the thing is, like, it also improves my biggest issue with the story of Dracula, where I don't know why Dracula would obsess over Lucy in particular. Like, really? Like, that... There's so many women in town, and there's so many women that, like, you're just happen to be attracted to this romantic interest to the main character. But in this version, it's like, no. The younger version, like, his old wife was played by Winona Ryder, so it reminds him of the wife he used to have. So his motivation for like connecting with Lucy is not only more engaging on an emotional level, but just makes much more sense and feels much less like a plot convenience. And I thought that was kind of like a nice little improvement to like my biggest plot hole of the story.
It's like in his mind, it's her like reincarnated, and he almost like gaslights her, makes her believe that as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you mentioned the film's really horny, but I actually didn't mind that too much, because I feel like that's an important part of Dracula, like the provocative nature and like kind of the dangers of like this reckless sexual behavior, kind of overcoming you and spreading this illness as an allegory for like AIDS, or we talked about like the 1918 influenza or the Black Plague, and what better way to spread that through sexuality. So that actually didn't bug me too much when sexual content can like kind of give me a cold shoulder outside of a couple scenes. Like the one scene where it kind of bugged me is like, first off, the threesome joke was so dumb. The threesome joke at the party was so stupid and played out. Like the whole like, oh, here's that person I really love. Hey, you're great. Oh, hey, here's that other person I really love. I'm like, let me guess, there's going to be a third.
I found that hilarious. I found that shit really
funny.
I don't even remember that, but I do remember the when she's talking about, oh man, it's so big, can I touch it? And she pulls out the guy's knife.
Oh, that joke was...
I thought that was kind of like, cute.
I don't know. I didn't think it was that funny. And the other time was... Every scene with those two I thought was the worst parts of the movie, honestly. Like, that's where the film... I love the stuff with Dracula so much that and Van Helsing, of course, like, he's surprisingly hilarious, but also, like, really compelling and interesting in his own way. But every time it like cut back to Keanu Reeves and Lucy, or every time it just cut back to Lucy and his friend, like that was like the epitome of this is what women do when they talk with each other, right? Like they just run around and fake laugh in the rain and kiss each other, right?
I don't know about all that.
And hey, I'm not one to judge. Not everybody knows how to write the opposite gender. But if you don't know how to write the opposite gender, like get someone else to like look over the script. He
breasted boobily down the stairs.
Oh yeah, that's true. Oh yeah, well, I mean again, that aspect I didn't mind so much, but that scene was like the only time where the sexuality kind of bugged me. But other than that, like, I actually didn't mind the horniness
of
the movie.
Say this, for what it's worth, what happened with Lucy in the beginning, it may not be as interesting as as the other parts of the film, but by the end, when you have that payoff of her getting like sexually assaulted by this werewolf, and it's like she's become an undead bride and she vomits blood all over
that
everybody.
That was very Exorcist-y, I thought.
They have to cut her head off. I mean, that payoff made all of the earlier stuff more bearable in my mind.
I hated her as a character, so I just wasn't invested.
Well, I'm sorry, that's a you problem.
Well, fair enough. It is my opinion. It's literally a me problem.
Yes, literally you. But my thing is, no, I'm not agreeing or I'm not disagreeing that she's maybe, she's not the best or most compelling character. What I am saying is the payoff of like raising the stakes was phenomenal.
Yeah, like the visuals of it were really cool, and I love that shot of her like coming down with the kid. And again, I don't know why she comes down with the kid, but who cares? It looks cool. Like, it looks really cool. And also, did you notice the first shot of Anthony Hopkins arriving at the house looked pretty similar to that iconic shot of The Exorcist? Just gonna slip that in there.
I did notice.
But there's a lot of like cool references to horror movies. Like there's the first-person tracking shots felt a lot like the spirit shots from The Evil Dead, and the goofiness of it kind of reminded me of like 80s like horror comedies. Like it's kind of surprising to me like how much of a love and passion he has for the genre of horror. And that's one aspect I definitely appreciate about this film, is that it doesn't, outside of two awful lead performances, it doesn't feel passionless in the slightest. But my problems just stem from, it's kind of the same with Hellraiser, where like the villains are so compelling and their struggle and their personal dilemmas are so emotionally investing that the heroes in comparison are just really lame. I just don't enjoy. I like the scenes of Lucy with Gary Oldman, but that's because I love Gary Oldman, and they're elevated because Gary Oldman's there, and like the elements of his character. But any time I cut away from that, I was like, yeah, I'm just not really that invested.
I don't know. I mean, I didn't have as much of a problem with Winona Ryder or Keanu Reeves as you did. I mean, I kind of understand where you're coming from, but I don't think it ultimately took too much away from me. I think there is a lot more to love here than there is to hate.
I enjoyed it a lot. I'll give it that. It wasn't boring. I will say it's too long, but it wasn't boring. Let's rate it. What you guys?
I don't think it was too long either. It was still just like 2 hours.
Well, I feel like there was a point where like it should have ended and wrapped up, and then it just kind of kept going, and it felt very awkward. Like it felt like the equivalent of like somebody giving a final monologue, and then after the audience claps, they keep going. It just feels off.
I mean, I do find it.
Lost you there.
Funny that you've gone on record. I loved it. I'm gonna give this 9.6.
Nice.
Wow. Okay.
That's good.
I'm gonna give it the opposite. I was gonna go 6, but yeah, you know what? It's a little too harsh. There's a lot to appreciate. It's visually fantastic. Like, watch this in the best quality TV possible if you are gonna watch it, because it is a visual treat. I didn't like the heroes, but I absolutely loved the depiction of Dracula. So for that, it gets a 6.9 out of 10.
Wow. I'm gonna give it a 9.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Damn.
Wow. I thought it was solid. I liked it a lot.
Well, you're biased because you like The Matrix, so anything with Keanu, you're just more possibly attached to.
I mean, yeah, I mean, Keanu Reeves and Monica Bellucci. I mean, come on, man.
Name a more iconic duo.
Yeah, right.
Before you go, Stephen, what are your quick thoughts on Morbius before you go?
It is one of the movies of all time.
What would you rate it?
You know, here's the well, I want to stick around for just.
You're cutting in and out constantly, man.
Right. I apologize. No, I saw this film when it hit VOD, which was probably just before they re-released it in theaters. And you know, this film is like the problem that I have with it is that it's kind of trying to market itself, especially around the re-release. There was this push to market it as this like so bad it's good film. You know, there was this angle that they were trying to do with Morbius, where it's like it's a campy sort of like it's in on the joke. And I feel like when you actually watch the film, it's not at all.
No.
It's like,
no.
It's just a very basic studio film. It feels very passionless. The dialogue is atrocious.
Oh, yeah.
The performances are mixed at best. I don't think there's a great performance in this at all.
No.
The choices of direction are so bizarre. I mean, there's an entire sequence where the enemy or sort of the bad guy vampire is dancing in a mirror
For
like
no
Spider-Man 3. And it's the song that they picked for this movie. He's dancing.
Well, I'm glad I came in at the right moment.
Yeah, we're talking about Morbius.
It sounds like saying poop my pants and have sex. Was I the only one who misheard those lyrics?
No, no, it was like, let's fuck or have sex, just some generic sex song. And I think it was like, I think it was meant to like represent like he's happy to like be walking on his legs again and not be a cripple, but that was already represented at the hospital. That was already conveyed. You didn't need to convey it again. The only other thing I could think of is, oh, they just want to please like the girls, the Doctor Who fans in the audience, give them some fan service, if you know what I mean. Because what other reason does that scene have to be there? Oh, sorry, I haven't talked about the plot of this movie. So Morbius is the epic journey of a character named Morbius. He's a cripple. Grew up a cripple. Yeah, Michael
Morbius.
Oh, because that's not fucking stupid at all. But anyways, Michael Morbius grows up a cripple. It's alliteration. And Matt Smith as a kid grows up a cripple, and Morbius does something that shouldn't have worked to fix his blood, and Jared Harris is like, holy shit, you're a genius. Why don't you come with me? And then they hard cut to him getting awards, and he's this famous doctor that he's made this fake blood that looks like Kool-Aid, but it's fake blood. Just trust us on that.
It's blue Kool-Aid, yeah.
It's blue Kool-Aid, and he's also using bats to research a cure for his ailment. And eventually he does find that cure by turning into a vampire. And eventually Matt Smith follows along the same plan, and Jared Leto has to fight against the growing... So basically the plasma blood is keeping him fed, but it's only keeping him fed for a certain amount of time, and that time is dwindling as we go along. And on top of that, he now has to deal with Matt Smith, who's running amok in the city, and now he has to fight him. And Devin, your friendship with me is questionable, because last month we had Bohemian Rhapsody, now we have this. What did I do to you? What's this for Pathfinder? Who hurt you?
My own expectations.
Yeah.
This is, you know, I will say this. I think there was a lot that was changed in the editing room.
Yes,
because if you watch the trailer versus the actual product, there's so much that's changed.
The trailer spoils the after credits scene.
Well, the trailer also, it has one scene where he's like, I'm Venom, and then he kind of laughs it off because it's ridiculous. But in the movie, they kept that scene, but they cut the part where he's like winking and nodding. So he's just like, I'm Venom.
So he's just saying he's Venom. Yeah, he's just Venom.
It makes no sense.
Why?
They tried to make this film like dark and edgy. It feels more like, and I don't want to say homage because that's too smart of a word to describe this film, but it feels like it's loosely inspired by that time in superhero films where we got stuff like Spawn. Like every hero had to be dark and edgy, but then at the same time it has this goofy poop your pants have sex song in the middle of it.
Oh, and comic relief detective does the least funny comic relief detective I've ever seen in the movie.
And that's the other thing. One of the detectives in the trailer has a cybernetic arm. And that's completely cut from the final film. I wish I was kidding. There's so much. This is the most
what happened
schizophrenic, soulless corporate film. I think somewhere there is a documentary about the making of this film that would rival Hearts of Darkness, because this film was delayed like 15 times,
even before
until
COVID.
they finally just threw it out there as is. It's a fucking disaster.
But Jared Leto says it's a great movie, and he says they didn't do prosthetics because it's the future. CGI is the future. CGI that looks on par with Gollum from 20 fucking years ago. It looks so bad.
He also did the thing that Daniel Day-Lewis did with My Left Foot, where he was like, I'm gonna method act. I'm gonna make people carry me to the bathroom.
Oh, yeah.
He would hold production up for hours
for
on
45
end
minutes at a time.
Because he would have to, like, walk on his crutches. Like
it got to the point where they said, like, just go on the wheelchair. That would be faster. Can you at least do on the wheelchair?
I mean, I don't even know.
Sorry, Devin, you were saying?
I'm unfortunately short on time. I'm going to let you guys get to it.
All right.
I will see you guys next week when we review Cronenberg's The Fly, Ginger Snaps, and the French horror film Inside.
Oh boy.
This has been one of the episodes of all time.
Indeed.
You're making me more.
Thank you guys for having me, and I'm giving Morbius the most ironic score that I can possibly give it. A 6.9 out of 10, which is probably generous, but I can't even review this as a legitimate film. It's not.
It's a not movie.
No, it's a walking meme. It's not even a film. It's not a movie. I don't even know how to qualify it. This film has broke my brain. Even in the short time that we're trying to review it. I literally saw this once and now I've seen it again. And I feel like I've lost even more brain cells the second time.
Which isn't as bad as the guy that decided for a video to go watch it 5 times in a row in theaters.
It's so popular that when they showed it in theaters, some of the theaters didn't even bother turning the lights off.
Wow.
Nobody would go see this. They re-released it, and it made $60,000 internationally.
That's wild.
Because they listened to the memes. They took the memes seriously.
I can't add anything. Thank you so much.
Good night, Steven.
This has been a Morbin good time. I'm Morbin on out of here.
Morb.
All right.
Morb later.
Morbi later. Sorry, Devin.
You know, I will give credit to the guy that did go and see that film that many times in a week. He actually bought tickets to go see everything ever all at once, so his money went to the right movie. He would just subject himself to Morbius instead. Like, he would just go intentionally enter the wrong theater after buying a ticket for everything everywhere all at once.
Because he couldn't give any money to Morbius. It was like, I can't make this a success. Like, I can't tell them they're doing something right. Because I am struggling to think of normally when we watch a movie on this podcast, I think of a few good things to talk about. Evil Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, like, even though I have problems with it, it's a visual masterpiece, the villain is compelling, the music is great. I could give it some compliments easy. Bad films, For Love and Thunder, I hate that movie. Performances were pretty good. That's one positive aspect. I cannot think of a single positive aspect for this movie.
I will say one thing. I've heard a lot of people talk shit about the VFX in this film. That was the least egregious thing about this. In fact, considering the source material and what they had to work with, the VFX were really good. Just considering how much of a shit show the production of this was. Like, people like to blame the VFX artists when there's lackluster effects and not the production studios that give them impossible deadlines and make them do these physically impossible things. I mean, so as far as like the visual effects go, I kind of like that aspect of like the smoke everywhere,
Oh, I
even though it makes
hated
no
that.
sense. Even though it makes no sense, it looks neat. And I did like how this film opened, like aesthetically. Like I like the opening credits with the pink and the blue
There you
kind
go.
of
That's one positive thing.
with the gradients, and I will say the second unit photographers, the cinematographers filming things from the helicopters, they knew what they were doing. They did a good job. Um, and unfortunately, it's projects like this where they expend these incredible talents to something that isn't going to amount to much or make much money. And this is kind of the burden of working in the film industry, is that most of the projects you work on will be kind of like this, where there's corporate interests and lack of vision and direction and just hodgepodge of bad ideas that are thrown together in order to make money. Um, this is the most just like mid movie I've seen in a while. Like outside of all the memes and all the stupid fun jokes that we share and make, um, it's just a very movie. Like
Yeah,
it's
meme culture really hyped this up way more than it deserves.
oh
It's
yeah,
kind of like the B movie situation where it's like this film is nowhere near as interesting as you guys made out to be.
oh no, like it's barely worth the notoriety that the memes make it out to even have. Like it's not even so absurdly bad that it's genuinely entertaining. It's
It
just
has its
like
moments. It has.
it's just like a meh kind of Marvel offshoot movie, like
Well, I think my
It's
biggest yeah.
there's very little substance to actually go on in terms of talking about it.
Yeah, I agree. And one of my biggest problems with the film is that it insists that I should care about what's going on, but it gives no time whatsoever to develop any of the aspects I should care about. Like, the most egregious example was when Matt Smith and Jared Leto were kids. I refused to use their character names because the actors didn't even try, so all I could see were the actors.
There was Michael, and then there was Lucian, which this is another thing that I had a problem with. He keeps giving you a pet name Milo, saying, "Oh, there was a Milo before you, and there will be a Milo after you," which so he's using that name as a derogatory term to say that you're nothing special and you're gonna die. That's kind of what that slight means. But then it ends up being like a name that is endearing for him later on. It's like, you gave me my name, and it's like, why the fuck are you happy about that name,
Yeah,
considering what
it's
it means?
Milo.
Like, it should not be a name of endearment for you. It should be a name that like, okay, this is a missed opportunity in the writing that I said, is that if Michael keeps insisting on calling him Milo, he should have pushed back saying, that was never my name. Like, it was, you barely even remember my name, or
Yeah.
something like that. Like, that could have been an interesting thing. I did not buy Milo's villain arc. I did not buy Morbius being the anchor of morality here. If he's going to be a villain character, he should be the one that is dead set on, proving that this vampire hybrid with human DNA, this vampire bat hybrid with human DNA is a good idea, and it should be Milo that's trying to stop him in vain. Pun.
Yeah, and he'd have a character arc. My problem
And
is,
it would be a lot more interesting if like Michael Morbius is this high-powered guy on this addictive rush, like a Howard Ratner type of character, and people around him are trying to, tell him to slow down and he just doesn't listen. That would be a much more interesting character to me, is if he was full villain mode as the central character, and it's the people around him that try to, save him from himself, and then he just ends up, regressing or becoming like a worse off thing. That would make for a more genuinely interesting character arc to me. But they didn't have the balls to do that, something like that, and they kind of meet there somewhere in the middle, and right in the mediocrity realm.
Yeah, and the biggest problem with their dynamic is that they're so clear cut. Like, I hate the villain trope where as soon as like the best friend gets a taste of this negative aspect of his life, oh, he's a bad guy. Just immediately. As soon as he becomes a vampire, he's a bad guy. Like, another way around it to make it so much more compelling is to have an arc. Like, at first he's like, what the fuck am I doing? And maybe he's going to Milo for help, but as he feeds and feeds, like, play it out a little bit, actually develop it. But it's so much easier from a writing perspective, just be like, nope, they're just a bad guy right away. And I get what they're going for. It's like the two opposites. They experience the same event and they're learning different lessons from it. But you could have conveyed it in a way that was so much more compelling, especially considering Morbius has no flaws as a character, not one whatsoever.
That's the problem. The problem is that he's flawless as a character.
Yeah, he's so smart. He's so strong.
He's quick to realize his mistake, which is normally a term of endearing, which normally would be endearing. But I just don't buy that Jared Leto has like a strong moral anchor. He seems like the type that wouldn't.
Yeah, very.
It's just and maybe that's a subversion of expectation or whatever. But like, I pitched this entirely for laughs. Just it seemed like everyone else was talking about it. I wanted to miss the hype train on this intentionally and come back with like fresh eyes, hoping that I would have like a newfound perspective for being outside of the realm or whatever. But yeah, it's like there's very little here to actually even go on.
Yeah,
to really
I kind
give
of
it that.
wonder if that's why Jared Leto is defending this movie so much and defending his character, is just so he can have a vanity project. Is so he can have an excuse to indulge himself in the role where every character he surrounds himself with is just like, oh, you're so smart and so strong and so powerful, and you win all these great awards that the Queen herself gave to you.
Well,
oh God, you're so cool. You're so nice to that kid in the hospital, Jared. Oh, you're so awesome. Pisses me off when like these millionaire Hollywood actors need these vanity projects. All of these big budget projects that could tell a much more passionate story that has to surrender to the ego of these egomaniacs. Like, it's so frustrating.
Amazing how much self obsession they have while also having a lack of self awareness.
Absolutely.
Though you could say that ties into the vampire myth because vampires don't see their own reflection or whatever. I don't know if there's commentary on vanity there. Am I grasping at anything worth grasping here, Nathan? Now that you're back in here, like is there? I'm trying to tie the Lacanian idea of the mirror phase to vampirism. Is there anything worth connecting there, or am I just grasping at intellectual straws here to try to make an argument?
The mirror trope of vampires?
Well, there's the mirror trope of vampires, and then there's the idea of the mirror phase. When you're younger and you're a baby, you look into the mirror and you recognize yourself for the first time, and that's where you start to gain your sense of self-awareness. I'm just wondering if there's any connection there whatsoever to vampirism.
I don't know if there's any. Written rule of that connection to vampirism, but an argument could be made where you lose yourself in your transition to vampirism. That's certainly an argument that can be made there.
I see. So like you lose kind of your sense of self, and we were kind of jokingly connecting this to Jared Leto's kind of just larger celebrity persona, where he seems to be self-obsessed, but he's not very self-aware, or maybe he's too self-aware.
No,
I'm not sure.
I don't know. Well,
that seems to be all they're riding on in terms of salvaging anything of merit for Morbius.
Well, you could connect the whole mirror thing. You could connect the whole mirror thing to the fourth thesis of monster, which is the monster dwells at the gates of difference, and explains that the monster is difference made flesh that comes to dwell among us. It represents the other, the outside. from what is culturally, politically, radically, economically, or sexually normative. This concept and I'm reading from a page here just because it's been a while since I can't keep this all verbatim. I know what it generally is, but it helps when I have a reference. It is it's the monster is made to represent the other, and I think having a reflection grounds someone in humanity. So when they become a vampire, dwelling at the gates of difference is losing their reflection.
That's interesting, and I'm glad that you actually have like cited materials you're actually pulling from to make that argument. That's something I feel like we should do more on this show, and that's something I want to do more in the future is bring people in that know more about these topics than we do and can cite these things. And we're also going to give ourselves more times to research stuff. But it reminds me of going back to the Lacanian mirror phase idea. There was a study done around Halloween, which feels very apropos coming up, where they did this social test where it was one of those things where they set up a bunch of houses where instead of someone meaning you to trick or treat, they just left a bowl of candy outside, and next to that bowl of candy they would leave a sign saying please only take one. Now, for half of the houses they did this at, that was it. For the other half of the houses, they put a mirror next to the bowl and the sign. And what happened was the signs that the bowls of candy that didn't have the mirror next to it, kids generally took more out of. The ones that did have a mirror next to it, the kids generally followed what the sign said because they suddenly had that sense of self-awareness or a sense that someone was watching them.
And that disappears when you're a vampire.
Absolutely.
Depending on what vampire myth you're following, you're losing yourself or becoming, in some cases a thrall, or in some cases part of a lot of vampire myths have like a court or a vampire collective, something of the sort. But I think it's also probably I think it might also be a religious thing. Vampires being the scourge of God, something like that. There could be a religious element that's tied into the whole thing.
Interesting.
Nice.
But yeah, I'll have to read up it was the Monsters Dwells at the Gate of Difference.
Jeffrey Jerome Coe. Sorry, I've had a few beers.
Fair enough.
Jeffrey Jerome Cohen's 7 Theses of Monster. It was a concept that was introduced to me while I was in college, and a concept and a text that I often return to when I'm researching certain topics. I did a presentation on Batman and Batman within the context of monster theory, and I talked about how in many adaptations of Batman he fits into Cohen's 7 Theses of Monster. I quite closely tied Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns with Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
That one I have read, actually.
Huh?
That one I have read, actually. I haven't read the original Dracula, unfortunately. It's on my list. But I have read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is also a very interesting story.
I remember reading I had this omnibus, and I absolutely love the cover for this thing. It's Frankenstein, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Dracula all thrown together in one book, and the cover morphed their faces together in such a fascinating way. And
that's nice.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that.
I would love to do a Frankenstein discussion on the show at some point.
Yeah, I remember vividly. I had a copy, this like kind of adapted to be easier to read for kids version of Frankenstein. Like it was like a lower kind of grade level version of the book, but the way it wrote it was so fascinating. Actually, I remember it left a lot to your imagination. Like it just kind of it was like a summary of it more or less, but it had illustrations, and I remember just being like grade 2 or 3, and that really giving me all kinds of imagination. Like when I was younger, that kind of started, and I still have that. I still have that book actually. When the school got rid of it, I picked it up.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love monsters. From a very early age, I was fascinated with them. I really I really love Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There's a whole parallel between Jekyll and Hyde and a lot of other characters who have different sides to them in literature, and I often compare my.
Well, I think the fact that we're talking about this is a great topic, by the way, Nathan. Not to do any discredit, but the fact that we're talking about this and not Morbius is symbolic of the inherent quality that Morbius provides.
Oh yeah.
What else is there to even add? Like, it looks like shit.
Well,
it's edited like shit. It sounds
hilarious.
like shit. It's hilarious at parts, but I just didn't find that funny. To be honest.
The funny thing is, it is funny right now because the police are currently raiding our tour bus right now.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Wow.
Holy shit.
Literally, as you were talking, a police officer was looking at my passport right in front of me.
Oh, God.
Fascinating.
Tour life. But Morbius is, to me, just a symptom of superhero culture.
Yep.
If superheroes weren't this big, Morbius never would have happened. But the funny thing is that I feel like Sony's superhero films, like Venom and like Morbius, are weirdly movies that we would see in the early 2000s wave of superhero films. Just from what I've seen of Morbius, and of course I have seen Venom. And when I watched Venom, I thought, man, it's like someone traveled back into the 2000s and found a movie that wasn't released and then released it. But Morbius is symptomatic of the studios wanting to just dig for characters and make movies. Let's make a movie out of this character. Let's do this character. Let's do this character. And then it's, as a comic book fan, it's interesting to see because I get to see movies about characters that I grew up reading and that I never thought would get movies, but then we get something completely unnecessary like Morbius. Like, who asked for Morbius, for fuck's sake? But there's not much, like, given I haven't seen Morbius, there's not much I can say about it within the context of, like, monster theory or the classic tropes of vampire stories. And oh my god, they're really just trying to like check everyone's ID on this bus, and oh, what the fuck is going on, dog?
That's wild.
Yeah,
well,
this will be exciting, but yeah, the two Dracula films. Well, first of all, what I'll say about Nosferatu is its use of shadow is absolutely brilliant. I think I think Nosferatu is a very unique. Well, maybe it has a very, very cool visual language, which is emblematic of the time that it was made, and a lot of the films that were made during that time, and in that region. I think it really serves the story. It really serves the themes of vampires, darkness, shadow, things you can't see, things that are obscured. That's what I love about Nosferatu. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, on the other hand, just beautiful, like production design, really lavish, really out there. Represent. I think both of these films visually represent different parts of the Dracula story or the vampire story. Coppola's has the extravagance of it and the allure of of it. You know, the very appealing. You know, they both. You know, when you go to when you talk about Cohen's thesis of monster, I think the films represent different theses where Coppola's is about Coppola's more represents the monster as a kind of desire, whereas Nosferatu sort of emblemizes the lurking outside the gates of the possible, or the monster as a kind of other. You know, I think both of and that's what I mean. That's just what I love about. That's what I love about the story of Dracula, and I'm normally one who hates reboots and remakes, but with a story with classic stories like Dracula or like Frankenstein or Jekyll and Hyde, like Phantom of the Opera, those stories have a quality to them where you can remake them for a different generation, where you can remake them, to let me see. What am I trying to say? Where you can remake them to stress or bring out different parts of what the original story is trying to tell. That's why I feel like you can keep adapting Batman as long as you bring out different parts that are in the source material to showcase.
For sure.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Nathan, we got to wrap up here, but I want to say thank you very
course.
much for contributing.
Thanks,
I mean, I think if Morbius shows anything, is that we need a vampire revolution. We gotta get back to what made the original film great. And that's for that reason. I'm really looking forward to Robert Eggers' version of Nosferatu.
Yes, and watch the Werner Herzog version. It is so good.
Yeah,
I'll check that out.
I'm looking forward to Eggers' Nosferatu. I'm also looking forward to Renfield starring Nicolas Cage as Dracula, and I think that Panos Cosmatos needs to make a Dracula adaptation.
That would be sick. And man, I totally forgot. I love the fact that Tom Waits is Renfield in Francis Ford Coppola's movie.
Oh yeah.
That was a cameo I wasn't expecting to see. I love that.
Yeah.
But anyway, I hope your tour goes smoothly over there. I hope the police don't raid your bus for
drugs.
They just let us go, so we're good.
Oh, sick, man. I was gonna let you talk for a while just in case any shit went down, then we'd have it recorded.
Yeah, right.
But no, I'm glad it all worked out. Anyway,
right.
we do have to get going, but thanks for popping in. This has been great.
Thanks, fellas. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man.
Any chance I get to talk about vampires?
We got some interesting films happening next week that were all done from horror from a hat, including The Fly.
Ooh, okay.
And also,
Ginger Snaps.
what are the other two films, Ian?
Ginger Snaps and Inside, a 2008 French horror movie. It's supposed to be good.
Gotta love French horror.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Raw is amazing, despite what Stephen will tell you. Morbius, it's awful in every way. I laughed at parts of it, but for the most part, it was just painfully dull, agonizing, awful, one of the worst movies of 2022. Now, it's nothing new to the conversation, but then again, Morbius added nothing new either, so 2 out of 10. Fuck this movie.
Morbin time.
I hate
Morbin
this
time.
What about you, Devin?
There
What
you
are you
go.
gonna rate it?
I'd give it a 3 morbs out of 10.
Yeah, I just couldn't morb with this one. Anyways, guys, unfortunately we're gonna have to wrap up, but thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay tuned for the first episode of Small Springs, and stay tuned for Conan. And as always, is it first day yet? Have a great night, guys. See you later.